The sky above Terra 12 burned red with smog, and fading sun ash drifted across rusted rooftops like tired snowtha. Crowd in the crater square stood in silence. As the selection began, they always gathered here, every cycle waiting for the names that would be plucked from the rusted orb and read aloud with ceremonial disgust. Each child of age stood shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed, hearts pounding, stomachs empty above them. The selection platform hovered on trembling turbines, its chrome hull smeared with ash, its flags hanging limp. Kael Riven stood behind the lines, just beyond the markers, his hands black with engine grease, his breath steady. He had fixed a power conduit that morning, repaired a drone leg, and recharged an air filter. For an old woman who paid in dry rations, he had no reason to be here. He was 22, too old, too forgotten. But when the names echoed out across the crater, he froze. The announcer adjusted her artificial vocalizer and spoke with clipped elegance for an and cold female tribute for Terra 12. Liora 10. Kael's spine locked. He saw her among the girls in the second row, small, quiet shoulders, trembling but chin lifted. Lioreth, girl who harvested broken glass from solar panels to build greenhouses and tunnels. The girl who once cured a mining foreman's fungal infection with moss and boiled salt water. The girl who had not looked him in the eye since her father died in the last collapse, stepped forward without knowing why. His boots scraped the metal path as he moved past the others. She had not cried yet, but she looked at him then, her eyes wide, her lips parting as if to stop him. I volunteer. The word shattered the silence like a dropped plasma core. Gasps surged like static across the crowd. Announcer blinked her artificial lenses once, then nodded. Volunteer accepted. Kael Riven, male tribute. No, that's not. Liora tried to object, but the enforcers were already moving in their exosuits, humming softly as they formed a ring around them. Kael turned toward her and offered a crooked smile. Guess I owe you. For that time you saved me from eating poison root. She stared at him for a moment, then gave the faintest shake of her head. You're insane, probably. They were led into the transport without ceremony. The crowd began to disperse quickly, as if ashamed of watching. Kael caught one last glance of the broken skyline of Terra 12. Its jagged towers, its smoke-veiled sun, and thought of the stories his father once told him of stars and cities and oceans that stretched forever. The shuttle interior was cleaner than anything Kael had seen in years. White metal walls, soft light pressure-locked seats. The other tribute from Terra 12 was already seated silently or stared out the viewport as the planet shrank beneath them. Why did you do that, her? Voice was barely audible. Kael shrugged. She's your little sister. Liora turned her head slowly, her eyes unreadable. You could have let me go. You didn't have to throw yourself into the furnace. Better me than you. You're a mechanic. You're a scientist, she exhaled. Not quite a sigh, more like resignation, folding into air. Well then, congratulations. We're going to die together. Maybe. But let's not make it easy for them. The outside, it looked like a polished moon, encased in black metal veins inside. It pulsed with life, and glass corridors, lined with the banners of the 12 worlds. Kael and Liora were ushered into the processing bay, where machines scanned their vitals, injected nanoprobes, measured muscle density, and asked them if they preferred incineration or vacuum burial. Replied with a shrug. Liora didn't answer. At all, their assigned keeper was a thin man from Planet 3, with elongated fingers and glassy icy, spoke in elegant riddles, and never looked at them directly. He told them how the crucible operated. They would be introduced to the others tomorrow. They would be given 3 days to train, then they would fight until only one remained. You are the first from Terra 12 to volunteer in 50 years. An impressive gesture. Most of your kind just beg. Kael didn't reply. The keeper continued, do try to make it interesting. The viewers enjoy novelty. That night, Kael couldn't sleep. The walls of his quarters glowed faintly with artificial starlight. Designed to calm contestants, he stared at the ceiling and thought of engines and gravity. Wells and Liora's voice in the shuttle outside. The crucible orbited the dead star Hellion 9. Its radiation filtered by massive shields that flickered once. Every few hours, like a heartbeat, he rose and wandered the corridor until he found the observatory. Leah stood there, her back to him, watching the infinite dark. He stepped beside her beautiful view. She nodded. Terrifying, yeah. That too. Do you think Earth was always meant to be forgotten? Kael tilted his head. I think they buried us because they're afraid we'll remember who we are. She turned toward him, and for the first time in weeks, he saw something behind her. Eyes not fear not sorrow, but calculation. We may not be fast or strong or modified, but we're not broken. We just learned how to survive without light. Kael smiled. Exactly. Tomorrow, we see the others. The real competition. Titans with steel bones. Minds that read thoughts. Giants bred to kill. Kael leaned against the glass. Then we find the cracks. Everyone has them. We just need to listen harder. Liora looked at him. You actually think we can win? He paused, then gave a half grin. Maybe not. But I think we can change the game. The crucible rotated silently around its dying star, and, for the first time in centuries, two Terrans stood side by side, not as victims, but as variables and calculated. The training halls of the crucible were carved into luminous crystal and alloy-like veins of frozen lightning. The walls hummed faintly with the energy of rotating biomes and gravitational shifts beneath their feet. Kael stood in the observation bay watching the other tributes cycle through their simulations. Swathed planets 24, competitors only one would leave alive. They moved like predators in a glass cage, each styled and shaped by the world they came from. The twins from Planet 1 floated mid-air, sparring with pulse blades, their hair woven with silver thread and their eyes devoid of pupils. The brute from Planet 4 slammed a warhammer into a reinforced wall and cracked the alloy with a single blow. The girl blinked and vanished from sight, her presence flickering like a glitch in space. Kael leaned forward, arms folded, subtle bunch. Liora stood beside him, her arms crossed, her gaze calm. She had spent the morning in the biochem lab quietly analyzing simulated flora, while others chased holographic enemies with teeth and claws. They rely on spectacle, they rely on body counts. Kael watched as a cybernetically enhanced tribute from Planet 9 disabled a drone using optic lasers. He shook his head. Most of them have never had to fix a generator by candlelight, never lived without heat or food or choice. Liora's voice was even most of them have never been ignored. They were summoned to individual stations by a keeper who drifted like vapor between platforms. Gale's station was a mechanical repair module filled with scrappy, glanced around at the tools and fragments and sat down within minutes. He had assembled a basic energy sling from stripped servos and an old calibration coil. The keeper watched with mild interest. Kael fired a charge across the hall and knocked a training dummy off its base. The other tributes paused and looked over. The keeper offered a slow blink. Primitive, but inventive. Kael grinned. Thanks. I used to build these for fun, before food became more important than toys. The keeper did not respond. He turned and recorded something on a tablet before drifting away. Liora's station was next to a nutrient synthesis panel. She requested samples of local moss compounds and simulation spores. A attendant raised a brow. Why not train with something lethal? Liora's voice was soft but steady. This is lethal, just slower. She crushed a fungal leaf between her fingers and added it to a vapor compound. Their mix turned black. The keeper watched her with the same detached curiosity one might reserve for an unusual insectator. They gathered in the communal hall. Food was provided in nutrient blocks and recycled water. Kael picked at his meal and scanned the room. They were being watched, not just by keepers, by drones, by eyes on every wall. He leaned close to Liora. We're not just contestants, we're content. She didn't reply. Her eyes had locked onto Sumone, a tribute from Planet 6. He was alone in the corner, his body marked by labor scars, not enhancements. He looked up and met Kael's gaze for a moment. Nothing passed between them but silence. Then the boy gave the faintest nod. Kael returned to it. Liora whispered, Planet 6 runs the ore furnaces for the council. They work their people until their bones rot from radiation. Sounds familiar? Later that night, Kael wandered the hall again. His room felt like a trap dressed as luxury. Found a maintenance panel near the training dome and pried it open. Inside was a network of wires and sensors. He traced them like arteries, finding the pulse of the crucible. Everything was recorded. Temperature, movement, heart rate. He smiled. The arena could track threats, but it didn't know how to read intent. He returned to his room to find Liora seated cross-legged on the floor, her hands covered in green dust. She looked up. I found something. Kael sat opposite her. That the moss mix again? No. This is something else, embedded in the simulation files. A pattern? A sequence. He frowned. You're reading the code, she nodded. It's old pre-imperial, possibly Terran, which means this arena isn't just for entertainment. It was built on something older. Why would they bury our code here? Maybe because we invented it. Kael sat back. The room was silent, but for the soft hum of energy in the walls, he stared at the floor, then at her. Do you think we can win this? I don't care about winning. I care about making them remember. The next morning, they were summoned for evaluation. Each tribute had 60 seconds to impress the overseers. The overseers sat above the arena behind a shielded wall of obsidian glasscale, waited in line as others performed feats of strength and agility. Blades danced explosions, burst genetic enhancements, glittered beneath exposed skin. When Kael's turn came, he stepped onto the platform, carrying nothing but a coil of wire and a broken drone. He knelt and began reconfiguring. Overseers murmured among themselves. Seconds passed. Kael stood and pointed the reassembled drone at a training dummy, fired a focused beam, and sliced the dummy's head clean off. Heat turned and walked away without a word. Liora entered next. She carried a single glass vial and a vine from the simulated garden. She poured the contents into the soil within. Seconds, the vine writhed, then wilted, blackened, and split. A moment later, a gas spread across the ground. The simulation registered lethal toxicity. She bowed once and left. That evening, the rankings were posted. Kael was listed third from the bottom. Liora dead last. Kael stared at the board and laughed once. They don't get it. Liora didn't even look. They never will. Until it's too late. Kael leaned against the wall, watching the others celebrate their rankings. They were smiling, confident, preening, but he saw the cracks. Aragon's division over-reliance on tools and powers they barely understood. He turned to Liora. Need a plan? We need options, then we make our own. He glanced at the boy from Planet 6. Again this time, the boy looked away, but not before Kael saw something behind his eyes. Not pride, but hope. Small fear is dangerous. The crucible rotated on the star beneath it, groaned in silence, and, to Terrans, waited in the dark. Not broken, not beaten, but building. The launch room vibrated with silent tension as the tributes waited inside their individual pods, each one sealed in armor glass and anchored to the floor like missiles waiting for ignition. Kael stood inside his capsule, hands clenched at his sides. His heartbeat steady, his mind empty. He could feel the low thrum of gravity dampeners spinning up around him, the weight of 1,000 systems shifting into alignment. Across from him, behind the other capsules, Liora stood in her pod, staring straight ahead, eyes calm, mouth set. They had spoken only once since the rankings. Words had become unnecessary. There were signals, now glances, nods, code buried in postures. She had mapped the arena through fragments of code left in simulation systems he had memorized. The structure, its biomes, its terrain, its flows. The keeper's voice echoed through the chamber, slick and hollow. Prepare for deployment. Game phase commencing in 5, 4, 3. The floor dropped. Kael's capsule shot upward, propelled by magnetic force and vacuum. Lifty braced himself against the sides as the darkness peeled away and light exploded above him. The pod opened with a hiss. He stumbled out onto hard earth, his boots crunching into red sand. The sky above was layered with fractured clouds and orbital lenses tracking every movement around him. Stretched a vast canyon valley, dotted with jagged rocks, thermal vents, and shattered relics of old techie. Could already hear distant motion. The others landing. The game beginning. Kael ran not toward the center, where the supply cache blinked with lights and danger, but west toward the broken spires that jutted from the earth like teeth. He slid down a ridge and ducked beneath an overhang, breathing shallow. His fingers moved to his belt, where he'd hidden the sling he built from wiring and heat. Filament 1 shot already loaded. He waited above the canyon. Word, like wasps. He counted 4, going east, 3, circling the cache, 1 flying erratic toward the smoke vents. He wasn't looking for a kill, not yet. He was looking for her. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then he heard Ita, high tone in the wind. Sporzy followed the sound down a narrow gully where steam hissed from vents and the air smelled like iron. Liora emerged from behind a fallen strut, her eyes scanning fast. She didn't speak. She passed him. A capsule inside was a map projection of the arena, its zones lit by energy signatures and movement patterns. She whispered, the northeast quadrant has solar decay. Radiation spikes every 5 minutes. No one stays long. Kael nodded. Good place to lure them. She added, I planted moss in the southern basin. It'll bloom in 6 hours. The gas should cover 10 meters. He smiled. You're terrifying. She didn't smile. She only said, "One team is already hunting. Planet 4 and Planet 9. They've got tech and numbers." Then we cut them off. She hesitated. "There's someone else. The boy from 6. He's been shadowing the teams. Not attacking, watching. He's waiting." Kael glanced at the sky. "Maybe he's waiting for us." They moved. They didn't run. They paced their steps. Calculated each motion, conserving energy and masking their trail with thermal flares. Scavenged from whence they reached a tower ruin by nightfall, its walls scorched, its windows filled with sand inside. They found rusted metal panels and old console shards. Kael started rebuilding. Liora watched the horizon, her hands coated in powder too. Hours later, they had a defense grid of shock wire and a perimeter of Moseed minescale leaned back against the "Walleyes closed," he whispered. "Why did you really come to the selection?" Liora didn't answer for a long time. Then she sat beside him. "I used to think surviving was enough, that one more day breathing was victory. Then I saw what they turned us into." Kael turned his head. "And what's that background noise?" "Filler, a cautionary tale for their children." He nodded once. "And now I want them to remember what happens when background noise becomes signal." Outside, the wind-shifted footstep scale was already moving, rising to the grid switch, ready to trigger the wire butt. The figure that emerged from the darkness did not attack. It was the boy from 6. He raised both hands and stepped forward slowly. His voice was low. "I don't want to fight you." Kael narrowed his eyes. "Then why follow us?" "Because you're not playing their game." "Neither am I." Liora stepped beside Kael, her voice cold. "What do you want?" The boy reached into his belt and tossed a chip to the ground. It flickered once and displayed a schematic though. "Crucible Interior Energy Routes Command. Nodes a hidden control vault. Deep beneath the biome, I found this in a dead keeper's datapad. If we get to this vault, we can override the cycle. Shut the arena down." Kael stared. "Why are you giving this to us?" The boy looked tired. "My planet burns bodies to keep warm. We are raised with knives in our hands and fear in our bones. But I watched your trial runs. You fight with purpose." Liora studied him. "And what will you do?" "I'll run interference. Lead the strong ones in the wrong direction." Kael stepped forward and extended a hand. The boy hesitated, then took it. In that moment, a crack formed, not in the crucible, but in the idea of it, in the belief that the outcome was fixed, that survival was in Nefgale. Looked at the schematic again, then at Lirathon, at the sky, and, for the first time, he saw not a trap but a path. Kael moved through the canyon like a shadow, his feet finding silence in gravel, his breath steady and shallow. The schematic burned behind his eyes. Every path, every checkpoint, every surveillance thread, woven like a living net above them, behind him. Liora stepped light, her gaze never idle, always dissecting the terrain like a surgeon studying wounds for points of weakness. The boy from 6, now known simply as Rin, had vanished into the eastern sector 2 hours ago, pulling the strongest tributes. With him, he had left no signal, only a mark carved into stone, a Terran symbol older than the council. It meant risk it, meant resistance scale. Tapped a broken console near the canyon rim and slid 2 wires into a scorched relay box. The pulse blinked. "Once then died," he whispered. "We're close." Liora crouched near a thermal fissure, her fingers brushing ash and steam. "They don't patrol here. Radiation masks our heat signatures, and the sensors flicker every 90 seconds. That's our window." Kael checked his sling, reloaded with a charge stolen from an abandoned drone. He nodded. "Then we move." They crossed into the northeast quadrant, where the sun fell red and broken against the clouds, and the ground pulsed with residual heat from ancient war engines, half buried in stone. The air was heavier, here not with atmosphere but memory, as if the land itself remembered. Deathly era paused. Before a steel ridge that sloped down into black, the vault, Kael stared into the dark, unsure if it was a corridor or a throaty. Muttered, "Only one way to find out." They descended together. The slope twisted into a forgotten structure, filled with rusted girders and collapsed walls, where council symbols had been scraped away and replaced with nothing. The silence thickened. Kael crouched near a power line, barely humming with residual energy. This place predates the Crucible, maybe predates the games. Liora ran her hand across an old interface covered in grime and moss. Terran architecture. "Look at the joins, the curvature. This wasn't made for killing, it was made for shelter." "Then why bury it?" "Because shelter defies the spectacle." Kael found the control access. Panel buried under a steel hatch, it pulsed weakly. He connected the stolen schematic node, and weighted lines of code scrolled across the glass. Authentication requested Liora. A phrase in an old Terran dialect. The console blinked. Authentication confirmed. A door hissed open inside. The control vault glowed dim with golden light. Old servers still running despite the rot and corrosion, their hum ancient and steady. Liora approached the central terminal. It's all still active. The game parameters, the surveillance feeds, even the biometric overrides. Kael stood beside her. You can shut it down. I can do more than that. She touched a key and the display bloomed outward, showing the entire arena from above, icons blinking. Over Tribute's drones' command towers, then a smaller window open. Feeds from every capital world, every citizen watching, every child in school, every elder in reclinus, every heir of the council devouring the show in silence. And a Williorist voice broke through. If I rewire the output, we can broadcast from here, not just images, data, truth. Kael grinned, turned the games into the trial. She began typing. Every keystroke rippled outward. The crucible stirred above them. A drone tilted its eye downward. Uncertain. Kael watched the feeds change one by one, switching from the curated stream to raw angles, unscripted, unsanitized. Leah spoke low. Now they see what we see elsewhere in the arena. Screams broke through the wind. Kael's head snapped up. He moved to the outer hatch and peered into the red dusk from the south. The ground quaked with footfalls. Not just one, several. He swore they found us. Liora didn't stop typing. How long? 3 minutes max? She handed him a palm-sized cube glowing pale green. That's the payload. If they take me, you run. You get this to the relay tower on the ridge. You plug it in. That's all that matters. Kael took it and didn't answer, because behind them the door exploded inward. Kael turned and fired his sling, discharged a burst of white flame that seared across the chamber, knocking the first attacker sideways. A tribute from Planet 4, armed with clawed gauntlets, roared and lunged. Kael ducked and rolled, flanking toward the wall. Liora activated a blast valve that triggered steam to vent across the chamber. Screams echoed the air, filled with heat and smoke. Kael moved like instinct, grabbing a fallen blade from the ground and driving it upward into the gut of a second intruder, a girl from 9, her eyes wide with shock. As she fell, blood pooled near the server. Liora kept typing. Kael's vision blurred to more attackers, now entering fast. He reached for another charge, but his belt was empty. Then, from behind them, a blur, and he'd tackled the last attacker to the floor, slamming his elbow into the tribute's face until he stopped moving. Rin stood panting, blood on his cheek. I looped the patrols, but they'll be here in force soon. Kael nodded and passed him the cube. You take it. Rin's eyes narrowed. Why me? Because we're not dying in a vault, and she's not leaving the system without finishing the upload. Rin took the cube and ran. Liora looked up. It's broadcasting, but if they cut power, it dies. Kael sealed the inner door and dragged a metal strut across it. Then he sat beside her, waiting, listening. The feeds now showed faces of tributes, faces of children. The truth, not the performance. Across the stars, people were watching, not consuming. Witness Ringling turned to him. If this works, it won't stop the games, but it'll make sure they know who started the fire. Kael leaned his head against the wall, and maybe, just maybe, they'll remember we weren't the broken ones. Above them, the crucible howled and the world began to change. If you are enjoying the story, please click that like and subscribe button. Also, comment your opinions. The ridge was steeper than it looked from below, carved by time and wind and the weight of dead machines, its path laced with jagged metal and scorched glass. Rin climbed fast, boots slipping once on melted stone, the cube tight in his palm, its pulse matching his own. Behind him, the sky shifted from red to violet, then dark clouds, billowing not with weather but with smoke, the crucible burning itself from the inside out. He didn't look back. He had watched his brothers die in mining shafts on his planet while the governors drank crystal wine and fed footage to the feeds. This time they would see the veins and dust and blood. The relay tower jutted from the cliff edge, half buried in debris. Its antenna broken, but its port still glowing faint. Beneath layers of Grimrin dropped to one knee and slid the cube into the port. It clicked once, then silencing. Stood listening to the wind, unsure if anything had changed, unsure if that click was enough. Then a light blinked, then another, then all at once the entire tower lit up with pale fire, threads of data spinning upward into the sky. Like signal smoke, he exhaled. Slowly below, The ridge movement caught his eye figures. Dark and fast approaching from the canyon, the remaining tributes drawn to the flare of activity, hungry or desperate or both. He gripped the knife at his belt. He didn't expect to make it down again, but maybe that was fine. The signal was already gone miles. Beneath the tower, Kael sat beside Liora in the ruined control vault, watching the feeds shift one by one, city's blinking viewers, staring for the first time. The broadcasts were not curated or edited. They were Ray Girl from Planet 2, screaming in a tree as drones hunted Hera. Boy from Planet 8, pulling metal from his own leg in silence. A child, no older than 10, lying in the sand, breathing slow, fading slow, while the camera lingered. Liora whispered, "This is the reckoning." Kael nodded once. They heard movement outside the vault, then silence. They didn't speak. Again above them, in the Crucible's command spire, the keepers watched their feeds go dark one by one. The director paced his platform, eyes furious. "Pull the override. Reset the stream." A technician shook his head. "There, inside the old relay, sir. And the node is authentic. There's no countercode." The director's mouth twisted. "Then kill the node. Glass the entire quadrant. No response from the orbital controls, sir. Power flux from the Crucible. System bleed." The director stared at the feeds, watched Kael lean against the vault wall, watched Liora's eyes, scanned the code like a surgeon carving with precision. He turned slowly toward the Highkeeper. "How did we let this happen?" The Highkeeper's voice was cold, because they were never supposed to matter. The Southern Ridge Sector tribute teams from 4 and 7 collided in blood, and Fire One girl screamed until her voice turned hoarse. Boy from 5 dragged a wounded ally into cover, only to fall moments later under drone fire, and all of it broadcast, unfiltered on the Capital World. Children wept in schools, and the mining moons workers stopped drilling again. The pleasure station's nobles watched with wide eyes and said nothing. Kael felt the shift before he saw Ita drop in atmospheric pressure. A hum in the stone. Liora looked up there, trying to disable the vault. Kael stood and helped her to her feet. "Then we finish this now?" She nodded. "I can encrypt the feed with a legacy code, make it permanent, distributed, immortal." Kael's eyes narrowed. "How long?" 2 minutes. Kael moved to the vault door and waited. They came, fast boots, metal voices, snarling orders. Shadows moving like storm scale fired the last 2 charges from his sling, then pulled a blade from the floor. He fought with rhythm, not rage. Every strike, measured every step, anchored. He was not stronger than them, but he was focused. They fell one by one, but he felt the weight building. Too many, too fast. Then Liora's voice called out, "It's done." He turned, and she tossed him a small drive, glowing gold, the core feed. "If I die, you take it. You run, you finish it." Kael didn't answer because the wall behind her exploded inward. A drone floated through sleek black and silent, its targeting lens spinning. Kael screamed, but she was faster. She turned and drove her blade into the console. The room lit up with fire. The drone fired once, then twice. She dropped. Kael caught her before she hit the floor, blood on his hands, on her chest. Her breath shallow. "I had to." He shook his head. "You didn't." She smiled faint. "I wanted to." He held her there as the room trembled and the servers began to burn. She whispered, "They'll remember now, then." Nothing. Kael closed her eyes then. Stu took the drive, walked out of the fire knot. Looking back outside the vault, the Crucible was falling apart. Zones, collapsing biomes, merging control systems, bleeding data into the open sky. Kael moved like a ghost through flame, and attributes watched him pass and did not raise weapons. They had seen the feed. They had seen the truth. Kael climbed the ridge toward the high tower where the Crucible's last transmission pulse could be rerouted through the system spine into permanent broadcast. At the top, Rin was gone, his body burned beside the tower. But the port still glowed. Kael inserted the drive. It blinked once, then began to copy the stars above him, lit with Signaveri, Planetevri, Domevri. Soul watching the games were no longer a show. They were a mirror, and everyone saw their reflection. Kael stood there alone, wind ripping across the tower, and waited. The storm broke over the Crucible with no warning, not of wind or rain, but of static, a surge of raw energy, rippling through the clouds as if the sky itself had awakened. The tower, where Kael stood, cracked at the base and groaned, metal fatigued from centuries of use, now trembling under truths to long buried. Kael felt it in his bones, the shift, the weight of what had begun, not just a broadcast, but a fracture, a signal sharp, enough to cut across 12 planets and burn through the blindness. Of comfort, the drive had finished its upload hours ago, but Kael remained at the peak watching below. The biomes bled into each other's walls, no longer shifting but collapsing trees, growing through steel deserts, encroaching on tundra predators, confused, their programming unraveling with each dropped connection. The Crucible was dying, and with it, the myth of order. Voice crackled behind him from a drone husk, half-functioning and dented. Unit requesting identification. Kael turned slowly. No unit, just human. The drone hovered, blinking, then fell silent. Its lens dimming. Kael left it and descended the broken slope. Each step painful, not from injury but from exhaustion. His muscles taut, his mind splintered with too many memories. Liora's eyes, her last breath, the fire in her voice, the ground leveled into a basin where the last few tributes had gathered, no longer enemies, no longer players. Some wounded, some silent, some holding weapons, they no longer raised. Kael stepped into the circle, and the murmurs stopped. A boy from 10 stepped forward, tall and gaunt. "You're the Earthborn." Kael nodded. He did not need to speak. The boy from 10 lifted a shard of glass, once a knife, now dulled, and offered it hilt first. Then led. Kael hesitated. Was not a leader, he was barely a survivor, but he took the blade because none of them would follow a symbol. They needed a person. Another tribute stepped forward, then another, a girl with a shattered drone visor over one eye, a boy with one arm. Together they formed something, not yet a rebellion, not yet a resistance, but no longer a game. Kael said. "The games are over," the girl spoke. "They'll try to start them again." Kael nodded. "Then we make sure they can't." From orbit the keepers watched through fractured feeds. The director stood pale at the console, his hands clasped his lips. Drawn tight, the High Keeper said, "They're organizing." The director muttered, "It's temporary." Panic, nothing more. Another technician cut in. "The Crucible has lost containment. We can't reset without full planetary override, and the node has fragmented into 7 public channels." "Shut them all down, sir. We can't. The data is embedded in civilian networks. If we wipe those, we lose the trade grid. We lose the outer colonies." The director turned slowly, his voice brittle. "Then we let it burn, and we start again elsewhere." The High Keeper frowned. "No, we escalate." The director's eyes narrowed. "To what to?" Extermination. Below the Crucibles, artificial moons began to shift panels, opening cannons, adjusting orbital paths, their power systems humming with plasma. Kael saw them before he heard the sound, a slow-motion sun blooming behind the cloud seat. Shouted, "Scatter!" Now, but it was too late. The first beam lanced through the basin, melting sand and bone-turning silence into chaos. Scale grabbed the nearest tribute and ran, half dragging, half carrying, as the second pulse scorched the canyon edge around him. Screams rose, then cut short, fire swallowing them whole. He rolled behind a stone ridge and shielded the others as best he could, but the air had turned to glass, and the earth to heat. When the sky calmed, nothing moved for a long time. Then Kael rose, burned, shaking, alive. Only for others had survived the bombardment, their eyes wild, their bodies blackened with ash. He helped them stand one by one. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. Kael turned toward the remains of the Crucible spire, now half collapsed and still smoking, and he walked each step, a defiance each breath, a rejection of silence. Inside the control dome, what remained of the vault still flickered. Liora's console cracked and buried in rubble, but still faintly pulsing. Kael knelt beside Eth, touched the screen. It blinked, and her voice played. "Not, live not. Real but recorded." Kael froze. She said, "If this plays, I'm gone. I knew I would be, but that's not why I recorded this. I did it because I need you to know it wasn't just code. It wasn't just resistance. It was love. I loved what we were, what we became, and what you can still be." Kael closed his eyes. The message continued. "I set a backup to deploy on every world. Every device that tuned into the games. It'll take a while, but it's already seeded. They'll never silence it all. And if they come for you again, you'll know where to go." Coordinates blinked across the screen. Deep space uncharted a location, unmarked by the Council Sanctuary. Kael memorized it, then destroyed the screen. High stood again, fire in his spine. Around him the land had turned strange and new, no longer divided, no longer designed. The Crucible was no longer a weapon, it was a gravon. In its ruins, something else stirred hope, or perhaps something stronger, conviction. He turned toward the survivors. "This ends now." They did not ask how, they did not ask why. they simply followed because, when fire eats everything, it leaves behind only truth. They were finally ready to speak it. The ship was old before Kael was born, older than Earth's dust. A freighter retrofitted 100 times over from cargo hauler to mining skiff to outlaw. Transport now, it served as a lifeboat groaning through fractured space with 5 surviving tributes and 1 directive: stay alive, stay hidden, carry the signal. Stars blurred past them as the hull vibrated beneath their feet, deep in the outer dark, beyond regulated space, where the Council's reach grew thin and whispers traveled faster. Then Lightcal sat at the helm, watching an unmarked sector swell on the scanner, blinking in low red pulses, each one a warning not from the machine but from memory. Liora's coordinates had led them here, the last gift from a girl who had died. Defiant and bright, the others sat in silence behind him to warn for fear too. Determined for despair, the girl with the drone visor, now gone, replaced by a band of carbon mesh and healing scars. The boy from 10, who now called himself Flint though. Kael doubted it was his real name, a girl from Planet 3 who barely spoke, but rebuilt the ship's targeting array with wire and patience and rageflint. Leaned forward. You think this place is real? Kael didn't answer. He thought of the message. Liora had left him the line, she repeated twice, because she must have known he would doubt it too well. No. Where to go? The scanner pinged. Once a structure emerged. A head, not large but dense, pulsing with soft heat, a sphere of alloy orbiting a dead moon. No lights, no signal, no council. Kael slowed their approach. That's it. Flint stared through the viewport. It looks abandoned. Kael nodded. That's the point. They docked slowly, manual latch, grinding, then sealing with a hiss the corridor beyond. Dark but breathable air, thin and clean. Kael led the way. The station with silent and cold walls, slick with condensation lights, flickering awake with each step, as if remembering their purpose after centuries of sleep. Down a narrow hall, they found a chamber filled with terminals, all ancient, none active until Kael pressed his palm to the interface and spoke. Liora sent us the room, lit up screens, blades. One screen pulsed with an emblem not of the Council, not of the games, but of Earth, a shattered planet overlaid with 12 stars burning around it. The girl from 3 whispered, "What is this place?" Kael said. Home files began to scroll across the screen's records, images, sound logs, memories preserved not just of tributes, but of those who had resisted long before them. Voices lost to silence, now rising again. One recording playday. Man's voice, older, cracked, but clear. If you found this, then the crucible has fallen, or it's about to. This is not the first revolt, but it might be the last. We failed because we fought alone, planet by planet, sector by sector, always crushed, always contained. But if you are here, you are not alone anymore. Kael felt his chest tighten. The voice continued. This station contains maps, communication protocols, hidden access routes, even Council archives, all scrubbed from the official net. If you want to end the games for good, you'll need all of it. And more. Another screen flickered, showing the orbital paths of all 12 planetary arenas. How they fed data into the capital, how they were protected, and more importantly, how they could be shut down. The girl from 3 leaned over the console, her fingers moving fast. To crash the feeds, freeze the betting pools, disrupt the control towers, in sync. Kael nodded. Do it. Flint stepped beside him, and after that, Kael turned slowly. We go to the capital. Flint stared at him. That's suicide. Kael's voice was quiet only. If we go alone. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small transmitter, an Earth relic jury rigged by Liora to bounce off forgotten satellites across hundreds of sectors. He activated ITA, single message sent out in a narrow encrypted burst to every rebel cell, every miner's rig, every hidden dome that had ever mourned a tribute. We have the coordinates. We have the truth. Join us. And then he waited for 1 hour. Nothing happened. Then the terminal lit up. One by one responses blinked. ENA dig team from Planet 5A, Freight Union from Planet 9A, band of asteroid squatters from the Iron Ring, and dozens more, each one just a few words. We see you. Where coming for the first time. Kael allowed himself to feel what had long been buried under duty and pain. Hope. The girl from 3 smiled for the first time. Flint chuckled. Lo, guess we're not alone. Kael turned toward the viewport where distant stars began to flicker, not with randomness but with purpose. Ships lighting their drives all across the void. Fleet born not of military command, but of memory, of injustice, of rage sharpened by time. He said, we Don't need to win today, Flint raised an eyebrow, then what Kael stared into the dark. We need to make them afraid. The station's systems shifted into defense mode, automatic protocols worry to life decades. Old, yet flawless weapons activating. Shields, pulsing turrets rising from forgotten bays. It was not a fortress, but it would hold for now. Kael took a breath and looked at his reflection in the black glass. He did not see a tribute. He did not see a pawn. He saw a soldier of Earth, and behind him stood the ghosts of everyone the games had taken, not just from Earth, from everywhere. They were no longer nameless sand. The stars would remember. The fleet arrived not as a spear, but as a tide, slow at first, then surging across the void with broken ships, patched hulls, and mismatched engines, each one bearing a symbol scorched into its plating, 12 stars around Earth's shattered silhouette. The emblem of a war, not sanctioned but born. Kael stood at the station's forward deck, watching the formation stretch from moon to moon, a mosaic of rebellion to scattered to track to united. To stop behind him, Flint adjusted the power cores, rerouted. Weapons locked in fusion overrides beside him. The girl from 3 named Lena now calibrated the virus with one eye on the capital's encryption feed, her jaw clenched, her fingers moving like fire. Kael spoke. Any response from the council? Lena answered. Without looking up, their jamming wideband and scrambling system comes, but private channels are lighting up like solar flares. Commanders defecting, senators fleeing, even a keeper just broadcast surrender from Planet 7. Flint grinned. Bet they didn't expect Earth to lead this. Kael said nothing, he thought, of Liora again, of what it meant to carry the dead in your voice. The screen flashed. The capital station had activated its defense grid. 6 orbital rings shifted into firing positions, their cannons blooming with plasma gates, closing around the central tower like steel petals. Kael whispered, "It begins." He raised the comm to all allied ships. "This is Kael of Earth. Target the broadcast towers first, then the data vaults. Avoid civilian sectors." Repeat, avoid civilian sectors. We are here to break control, not become it. And with that, the stars turned to fire. The first volley lit the dark like dawn, missiles weaving through flak fields, beams carving through cruisers, council sentries rising to meet them in squadrons of perfect formation. But perfection failed before desperation. The rebel fleet moved in arcs and spirals, unpredictable, erratic, impossible to track. No single leader, no singular command, just a storm of vengeance and memory. Inside the station, Lena's virus breached the first firewall, then the second, her eyes gleaming with each cracked code, every bypass another fracture in the council's hold. Council's hold. Kael gripped the console. He saw their lives unraveling on the screen. Not in numbers, but in faces. Guards abandoning posts, engineers locking down power routes, even drones hesitating, unsure which orders still meant anything. Flint yelled over the hum, "We got breach teams ready to jump in through the west hangar. Give the word." Kael nodded. "Do it." In the void, drop pods launched fast and hot, trailing smoke like falling stars, each one carrying a tribute or a rebel or a worker who had finally said, "Enough." They landed hard on the hull's magnetic clamps, biting airlocks, hissing plasma cutters, slicing through panels and plating, and lies. Kael watched until the screen showed green across all sectors. Then he turned. Time to finish. ETH moved fast through the station's suit, sealed rifle, strapped pulse hammer, holstered. Behind him, Lena and Flint kept pace, silent, eyes hard. Footsteps loud. They reached the transit shaft and dropped down 20 levels, landing in a corridor lined with carved ivory and gold relics of a regime so certain of its immortality it had never planned for retreat. Kael kicked the door in. The council chamber was empty save one man, the High Keeper, standing beside the central console, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed on the main screen, where spun slow and silent. He did not turn. "I knew you would come here." Kael raised his weapon. "Then you know why." The High Keeper spoke calmly. "You think you've won because you've stirred the wilds? Because you've shaken the net?" Kael stepped forward. "No. I think we've changed the story. You turned survival into spectacle. We turned memory into fire." The High Keeper turned finally, eyes sharp but tired. "You'll never hold it. The system is too vast. When you break one chain, another grows." Kael lowered his weapon. "Then we break them all." Lena stepped beside him, starting with this one. She plugged in her drive. The screen flickered, then glowed. Files streamed out onto public relays, not just from the Crucible, not just from the games, but from Every sector, every hidden budget, every buried command, detailing years of oppression-rigged events, manufactured famines, entire planets reduced to performance for profit. Kael said the whole galaxy will see now. They'll choose the High Keeper, said nothing only, watched as his legacy unraveled line by line. Calais turned a wit was done outside. The fighting slowed the rebel fleet, pulling back the capital ring, drifting powerless satellites, dimming weapons. Cold Kael stood on the outer platform, staring at the void ships. Still burned bodies, still floated, but something deeper had shifted. Not peace, not yet, but possibility. Flint joined him, shoulder-bruised arm in a sling. You think they'll rebuild it? Kael shook his head. They'll try. Lena came up beside them, wiping soot from her cheek. Then we make sure they remember. Kael nodded. Every year on this day, Flint chuckled. Dry a holiday. Lena grinned faintly. A warning above them, a new broadcast began across every channel, across every world, not from the council, not from any throne, but from Calais. His voice quiet, firm, filled with the weight of loss and the light of victory. He said, "My name is Kael of Earth. I was a tribute. I was a prisoner. I was told my life belonged to the games. I say no more. I say never again. From this day forward, no child will bleed for entertainment. No world will kneel for survival. We are not pawns. We are not playthings. We are people, and we are awake." The signal ended. Silence followed. Then one by one, screens lit up with responses. Not commands, not orders, just one word repeated from every corner of the galaxy. For Kael looked down at Earth, blue and cracked, but still turning, still stubborn. He whispered, "She would have liked this." Flint asked Liora. Kael nodded. "She started it," Lena said. "You finished it." Kael shook his head slowly. "We all did." The stars were silent, but this time they listened on. This time they remembered forever.